farming and on developing large-scale initiatives to accelerate the transition to agroecology. Alexia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this this introduction, and I'm very happy to be here today to set the scene and tell you a bit, maybe not what living labs are, but how we wish to understand them in the context of the initiatives that we are developing at EU level, and the experiences that we have come across that may have at least some components of these living labs and can serve as inspiration. So I'm going first to explain a bit why this interest in living labs from our side, how we came to it, then how we understand living labs so far, the state of that debate, then give you a few hints on what we are proposing on soil health living labs under the soil mission, and then give you a few examples that we can build on, not getting into details of them, but showing you that there are several that we can use. So why living labs? They came to us through different ways, different means. First, they came as a result of our approach towards multi-actor projects, our approach to interactive innovation under Horizon 2020, and also for innovation support under the Common Agricultural Policy. That are bridged through the EIP Agri, the European Innovation Partnership on Agriculture. So especially under Horizon Europe, we have asked farmers and scientists and advisors and all actors to work together towards a common goal in multi-actor projects. And several projects have come in with living labs as a structure to do that, because it's been there for a while now, and it's understood as a way to do this interactive innovation. Then it came as well because of the development of digital farming, and especially also in around the smart specialization platforms and regional policy. Because digital, living labs are well developed in the realm of digital technologies, and so as farming goes closer to digital, some living labs on agriculture emerge as well. And finally, they came to us as a result of international discussions in the framework of the G20, of the Meeting of Agricultural Chief Scientists, so the MAX, the G20 MAX, that set up a working group on agroecosystem living labs, led by agriculture, by Canada and the USA, and that confirmed this interest in living labs in agriculture, and raised the questions: could this be an interesting method and a powerful tool for change? Then we could see as well that this was on the rise. So in Canada, but also in several countries, in Finland, some living labs started to be accredited under ENOL, the European Network of Living Labs, like the ILVO Precision Agriculture and Food Living Lab, for example, in Belgium. There's a whole work on water-oriented living labs under Water Europe, big projects in France around territories of innovation, all with this approach. So it looked like something that was worth investing in. And also, it's an international community of practice because living labs were started to be supported in Europe, at least under the 6th framework program for research and innovation, FP6, so a while ago now, 15, 20 years ago. And a lot of living labs have developed. There's the network that has been created in all, and behind you have this big community of practice that has already, as I said, developed learning and capacity building tools, coordination methods, monitoring and evaluation indicators, not only on the content of the innovation, but on the process, qualifying the process that is happening in these living labs. And a lot of food for thought on governance approaches and sustainability approaches, how to sustain these ecosystems as they're defined. So we thought it was interesting to connect to that community of practice, to build a bit on what they've developed also for agriculture innovation. And it's also interesting for international exchanges because this concept is recognized or as interesting internationally. So what are the understandings of living labs now? So we have two departure points as the result of this story that I told. The first one, and the stronger building, rock on which to rely there is the ENOL definition. So the definition by the European Network of Living Labs that was set up as a follow-up to this actions under FP6 in Europe. And they define living labs as user-centered open innovation ecosystems based on systematic user co-creation approach, integrating research and innovation processes in real-life communities and settings. So that resembles very much with Gottlieb as described. And you can see, so this pillar is highlighted a bit: co-creation, multi-method approach, active user involvement, real-life setting, and multi-stakeholder participation. These are really the pillars of the approach. And the second departure point that we have is the definition that has been developed under this MAX working group on agroecosystem living labs. This one says that living labs are transdisciplinary approaches which involve farmers, scientists, and other interested partners in the co-design, monitoring, and evaluation of new and existing agricultural practices and technologies on working landscapes to improve their effectiveness and early adoption. It may seem different, but in fact, these definitions have the same pillars. So definitions are not so important. What is important is the pillars, and these pillars are the same really, because if you take transdisciplinarity, it includes the involvement of real users. And what's interesting in the definition on the right there is that they have tried to craft a definition, and the Commission was part of that work, a definition that matches the specificities a bit of the agroecosystem living labs, the fact that we're looking for environmental sustainability as well, and the assessment and monitoring of the practices and their impact is something quite central there, which may not be the case for a living lab that serves to develop a IT device for a flat, for example. And so the interesting features that we find there is the fact that you work on working landscapes, the landscape approach, the territorial approach, the place-based approach. So the idea is to work at territorial level or in a landscape, a place that makes sense ecologically, and you involve all the farmers in that landscape. So it's not only at farm level, but working wider. Also the multi-method, which is the same thing, then also transdisciplinarity, so involves a more systematic use of a wide range of social sciences and behavioral sciences and all these sciences that are necessary to understand why things work or why they don't work, why they're adopted or not adopted. So that's something you do at the same time that you do the technical innovation in living labs, and that can help a lot on the adoption front. And what's interesting as well is that beyond projects with living labs, we're looking to structuring the innovation ecosystem locally and build the social capital between the actors that work together, first maybe on one activity and then progressively on more. So how could living labs enrich the approach? Well, is the same thing that I have said. What we find interesting compared to what we've done already and what we're doing with the multi-actor approach and the horizon. So we had already a very strong stance on user-centered innovation, on multi-actor involving agriculture, farmers, advisors, science, industry, and actors that are relevant to the needs of the farmers that are explored there. We have already identification of the needs from practice. We have already a very strong elements on knowledge exchange. What is interesting to add that can be present in several of the projects that we have already, but is not necessarily systematically asked for, is this landscape approach, territorial approach, a bit wider, and the anchoring in the long term of these initiatives. It is the possibility maybe to discuss with a bit more people than what we have, so not just the sector and science and advice, but also maybe the local authorities, the consumer, so a bit other types of actors, and this central role of social and behavioral sciences that should not be had on a bit somewhere, but really integrated in the work. What's interesting to have in mind as well is that there can be several levels of scales where we talk about living labs. There's the macro level where we talk about the overall infrastructure, management, funding, and aims, the broad constellation of partners and stakeholders. So a level which is more permanent and ecosystem-like, and where all the actors are together discussing what to do. Then the meso level. So this is inspired from Schurman, 2015. is the innovation projects. So the projects actually themselves, where you have all this multi-stakeholder collaboration on developing innovation, and then within these is the individual activities that you have in each project. So you can have living lab projects that start and stop. That's one thing. They use all the components of the methods, but living labs themselves are something that is maybe more there to last a bit. So under the mission for soil health and food, we have had to go for a definition, although it's complicated because as you have seen, there are several departure points, and which one should we take? But the one we have included so far is, okay, the understanding is participatory, user-centered, place-based, and transdisciplinary research and innovation approaches that involve land managers and other relevant actors in joint work with researchers to conduct systemic research in real-life settings, identify practitioners' knowledge needs on soil health, and co-design, it could be co-create as well, test, monitor, and evaluate new or existing solutions to improve their effectiveness and early adoption. So we have a bit used this agroecosystem living lab definition that has been developed by the MAX, but you can see in green there that user-centered, transdisciplinary, real-life settings, co-design, extra. So the pillars of the NL definition are also in there. It depends a bit how you tweak the things. More than the definition, what matters is the finer understanding and how we interpret it. So for the soil mission, and I insist it's our proposed understanding for the soil mission, we have said we want to understand the living lab as a regional and sub-regional, so as a partnership of between multiple partners at the regional or sub-regional scale. Region doesn't necessarily mean an administrative region, but means a landscape, a territory that makes sense in terms of impact and of ecological functionality of ecosystems, extra. And within that regional, sub-regional area, several sites on which we have experimentation. So in a word, we don't want to define like one farm can be a living lab under this understanding, although it could be if under other circumstances. But what we want to have under the mission is a regional approaches, and underneath them several sites. And the lighthouses we define as sites which have achieved an exemplary performance in terms of ecosystem, the state of their ecosystem services and the state of their soil health as a support to these ecosystem services. And this lighthouse, on the contrary, they can be one site, or more generally, they would be one site with this exemplary performance. And these sites, they can be included in the living lab area, but there could be some that are outside as well. So the living lab is that the regional, sub-regional landscape that's really the partnership level, where you coordinate experimentation and between partners, relations between partners. The site could be local, one farm, one forest plot, one urban site, because under the mission, we don't have only agriculture, we have all the land use types. So that's where you co-create knowledge and innovations. And the lighthouse is also local, one site, but there you need to have demonstrated high performance in terms of ecosystem services and soil health. Again, more interesting than the definition is the exact criteria. So we have unpacked the definitions and what we want to see in terms of clear, criteria for the living labs that we would like to have under the initiative, using the aims, activities, participants, and context framework. So building on the work of our colleagues, Chris McPhee from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and Muriel Mambrini from INRAE and their colleagues. So the aims is, like all living labs, innovation, co-creation, and formal learning, but we've added some that would be specific to these types of living lab, that is the contribution to societal challenges and improving soil health and related ecosystem services in the area. So linking to the mission objectives. The activities would be the ones that all living labs carry out, as we have described, but really with the purpose of improving soil health and related ecosystem services. We would have research on impacts of these innovative practices on ecosystems, networking and knowledge exchange, demonstration as well. The participants, so as all living labs, these would be public-private people partnerships, but with users present would be the soil managers, so both in urban, rural, forest sites, but connected with a broad array of stakeholders and decision makers as well. And the demonstration will address, of course, also the wider public, the policy arena, the EIP, and the relevant networks. And in the context part, you find criteria that are more related also to these building blocks of the living lab definition with multiple disciplines, this transdisciplinarity, which is very important, including, we quite insist on social sciences, multiple methods as well, combinations of methods, combinations of dimensions. So you need to look at technical, economic, and social at the same time. This place-based approach and real life context. So we would like to have the sites that are real, commercial farms, forests, and real urban sites. And all this needs to be backed up by a robust scientific setup for the assessment of the soil health and the ecosystem services that are resulting from this. And openness, communication, and dissemination are also part of the picture. So that would be for the living labs. For the lighthouses, the criteria would be based on the performance in terms of soil health and related ecosystem services, using the criteria and indicators defined by the mission for that. So there you have a complete picture of what we are proposing for the mission so far. So under agroecology, you may know we also have a partnership on agroecology living labs under development under Horizon Europe. So a partnership is an initiative that will be co-organized with member states and co-funded with member states. So we also have identified living labs as an interesting tool there because they are seen as a way to empower rapid change. And we need to accelerate change, and agroecology elements, they fit very well with living lab principles because they also have place-based approaches, territorial approaches, social dimensions, and systems approach as a strong dimension. But there, the understanding is still under discussion, under development by the SCA Agroecology Working Group, together with projects already and Agroecology for EU that are co-creating this understanding, and of course with the same departure points. So when that concludes, we may have an iterative discussion also on the mission front to adjust and align. Living labs examples, finally. So there are a lot out there. We've organized last year webinars on agroecology, living labs, and research infrastructures, where we showcased 8 examples. That was on 4-5 June, not 2021, but 2020. Sorry for the mistake in the slide. And you can see the report there. You have a link in the presentation to it. We conducted also a series of mapping exercises by the mission board, by the projects that are sustaining the development of these initiatives. The SMS already and agroecology for EU are working on mapping exercises. We have done a first screening survey at the European Commission level as well. The ENOL has set up an interest group on agro-food living labs, and also building on the action-oriented task force on rural living labs. And finally, as I said, we have a lot of Horizon 2020 projects which have set up their structure with including living labs. So there's the Livrure more on rural development, AgriLink, Desira, Robust, Stargate, and a number of others. So there's a lot out there, and I cannot go into details of all of this, especially as I exhausted my time almost. But interesting to see that we have several that have been accredited already under the ENOL certification system. So that includes, for example, the Agroecology Living Lab of Ilvo in Flanders that you can see there. And their precision farming living lab that I mentioned earlier. In Hungary, you have the on-farm experimentation network of OMKI, which is quite interesting. It's not a regional initiative, but it's a national one, but there are a lot of farms involved, real farms, and together they define they really use this cycle of iterative co-design and experimentation process that I mentioned, and you can see described here. So they define together with the users the practice-oriented relevant questions. Then they design together simple experiments that can fit in the everyday farm practice. Then the researchers, they capture the data on the results together with the farmers as well. They evaluate and discuss together the results, they publish, and then we are back to the cycle for the next year to define what to do next. So this is really the good expression of the iterative cycle of co-design and co-creation that you have in living labs. Also, so in this webinar that I mentioned, you had a project from Germany on facilitating insects in agricultural landscapes through integration of renewable resources into cultivation systems. Sorry, I had to read that final. So there it's interesting because they had really this landscape labs, landscape approach to quite research still, but yeah, defining how to change the farming systems within these parcels, and the landscape approach was justified there because they were looking at how the insects move from one place to another and how they could best optimize that. So through innovative measures and novel crops and field experiments, they looked at field scale, but also upgraded their analysis at landscape scale. A very big initiative that was presented also is the VITIREV. So that's one of the TIGA, so Territoire d'Innovation, Grande Ambition in France. So that's a massive initiative, over 80 million euros, that covers all the wine production area in Nouvelle-Aquitaine with a system of archipelago of living labs. So they have small territorial labs that work together, almost at village scale, and it's very interesting what they do. And their main, they work, for example, on reducing the use of pesticides in winemaking there, and they have a whole structure in their labs with the living labs are part of the system, but it's linked with participatory research, with the risk monitoring, with the development of digital technologies and skills, and they're doing very interesting things in terms of behavioral studies as well. So as I said, we have examples in H2020 projects. So the Livrure is really comes from the community there is strongly related to Enel, and comes also from these FP6 projects that were funded. One was on community, was called Community at Rural, and they're working on developing tools for rural communities to be able to develop living labs to address their challenges. So a lot of interesting tools coming from that one. And on the right, you have AgriLink as well, which is on advice. So they're using the living lab approach to develop new advisory techniques to respond to particular industry issues written there. And they have interesting findings also on what they saw on these living labs, and they will have an e-workshop in July to discuss their finding. And finally, overseas. So last but not least, I would say, because we work a lot with Canada, they have been the first to implement a concrete initiative based on that work that was conducted at the G20 level. They have launched a major initiative in 2018 with a phased rollout. So you can see there that Canada is split into 5 big regions that make sense from a landscape point of view. And they are creating one living lab in each of them, and one at a time, so one every 6 months. So it's a bit we would dream to be able to do that, but we have to be a bit more to do a bit more at the European level to cover the territory. But that's interesting, and I put there what they describe as a typical living lab site. So a typical living lab site for them is 10 to 20 beneficial management practices. They call that BMPs. So that's really the innovation is about BMPs related to climate change, water, soil, biodiversity, implemented by 20-40 farmers across 3 or 4 watersheds. The watershed is often the boundary of the system of their living labs. They have 5 to 10 external partner organizations involved, and many other related scientific activities. So a lot of scientists that are working around providing service to the experimentation that is going on the farms that are co-designed by the farmers at winter time and implemented at summertime. And they have also running in simultaneously national and local economics team that are examining the barriers and incentives and the cost benefits and the decision making that is happening at farm level and that conditions the adoption. So they all work together around this co-development and evaluation of innovations. So that's really a benchmark for us, very interesting. And there's a lot of collaboration with Canada as well. And in the USA, you have a similar initiative, not so similar, everyone has their differences, but it's the long-term agroecosystem research network, which is running things that look like a bit living labs as well. So I hope to have set the scene. Thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to the other presentation and our discussion. Thank you very much.